Hello everyone, welcome to my Nature Diaries. Today I want to share with you some really basic and beginner watercolor tips and some techniques to help you get over any kind of intimidation you may have with watercolor. So let's get started with my first tip, which is create a border. Well, this isn't something that you have to do. It's such a great foundational tip because what you're doing is creating a frame to show off your art. This is especially nice when you are going to be painting the whole background of your composition. I'm drawing mine out, but you could use washi tape instead. Another foundational tip is number 2, use colored ink. I'm a huge fan of illustrating with ink. However, I don't always want that black outline. So in this case, what I'm going to be using is an olive green color. Now this ink is waterproof and I'll have it listed here on the screen and also in the description. By using greens or browns, what you're going to do is just get rid of that harsh line that you may not always want in your watercolor paintings. And also what you're doing is by drawing first like this, instead of just pencil, you're creating a great outline or like a coloring page for your painting, which is setting you up for confidence and success. Just a note, if you are more of a beginner with your drawing, just keep your outlines very, very simplistic and limit your drawing maybe just to one flower petal and a stem and one of the leaves. You don't even have to add in all these little hash marks or detail lines. It's just whatever is comfortable for you with your drawing. I'm actually making this composition from reference photos that I took, but you could use photos that are online if you know what the flower is, or even use a tracing out of a field guide. It doesn't really matter because it's your nature journal or nature diary. This brings us to number 3, which is the watercolor wash technique. Adding a watercolor wash is, to me, such a great way to just get past that blank page, that white page that's staring at you, and to just get right in with color. For this technique, I like to use a large brush or something that can hold quite a bit of water. This way I can get my brush wet and then make a watery mix of color. My very first wash, I like to be loose and light. Just by adding these light colors, it just lets me kind of get used to the paint and what it's doing on the paper and just experiment a little bit while I'm actually painting. I believe watercolor washes are the one thing that differentiates watercolor from maybe acrylics or even oils. It just creates such a beautiful, loose, transparent kind of effect for your painting. Even if you're brand new to watercolor, this technique really lends itself to looking like you've been painting for probably longer than you might have. While my watercolor paper is still damp, I'm going back in with a combination of sap green and ultramarine blue just to add some darker tones to create a background, shade, and depth. What's great about this technique is that you could just stop here if you wanted to for your nature journal, because just adding that background can help make your illustration pop. My biggest tip with a wash like this is to just make sure that the edges of them fade and that the darkest part of the color is towards the center or by the image. I'd love to hear in the comments if this is something that you like to do in your art journals or watercolor journals as well. Number 4 is a water control tip. I have to apologize ahead of time because I don't show this, and this is a paper towel, or you could use a cloth. I always keep mine off camera or to the side because I use it over and over again, so my little paper towels really look pretty crazy, but I just let them dry out and reuse them. However, they are vital for being able to control water and to be able to just work with the watercolor paint itself. They're really good for cleaning off your brush before you dip them into your clean water, or if you're mixing up a new color like this and need to adjust how much is on your brush. Even if you don't always see it in my videos, just trust me, I have always a paper towel, and it's usually in my opposite hand, and I do use it quite a bit to adjust the water in my brush. Whenever I do paint, I go between my paper towel, my paint, and of course the water itself. And as a bonus, your paper towel can be used as a tool to lift paint off, whether you just have too much pigment or maybe you have too much water on your page. Number 5 is to try 3 different shades of the same color. My palette happens to have 3 shades, 2 to 3 shades of most of these colors. In this case, I'm starting out with lemon yellow. And instead of me mixing all my colors separately, which you can do, I'm not saying not to do that, I like to just kind of combine colors by starting out with this cool lemon yellow. It's the brightest of the yellows here, and I want to just give a nice little background wash and even make sure it goes outside the lines. After adding that lemon yellow, I added some cadmium yellow, which I didn't show, and now I'm moving on to yellow ochre. What I'm doing with these 3 shades is I'm using them to add dimension, depth, and even to kind of indicate shadows in the petals. I do think this is a good tip for beginners because it allows you to try out your watercolor palette depending on the colors that you have and explore the colors that are there. You can also mix yellow with a purple to create the complement or the shadow color to your flower, but if you don't want to get into all of that, especially in the beginning, just use the colors in your palette to try to create the look that you are going for. I'd love to encourage you, especially if you are a beginner, to just get in there. Just start painting and mixing and trying some different colors and these techniques just to start. Number 6 is create color harmony. To do this, it's simply when you want to change some colors out, it's just to add your new color, the sap green, to the yellow ochre that's already there. You can see that I created a brand new green, and by using this green in the rest of my composition, it's going to create that cohesion and color harmony because it's a hue or tone that's already in the painting. The next technique I'd like to share is the blending technique. When I was painting only in acrylics, the one thing I was frustrated with the most was the fact that I wasn't able to blend very easily. I've learned ways that I can get around that, but I have to say that there's nothing like blending with watercolor. The very nature of the paint lends itself to just being able to do this very beautifully. I'm starting off with a clean white brush and I'm just putting on fresh, clean water. I want to get my page damp, but not where there's any puddles of water, but just so you can see a sheen on the surface. By doing this, I'm creating a place for the paint to be able to just kind of melt into the paper. Once again, I'm starting out with light washes of color that I'm dropping in. You can start out with a darker wash. It just all depends on the kind of painting that you're making. Putting that clean water wash down first is a great way to prep your paper for this whole blending ability, even though you can blend watercolor without that background of water. It really does add a different kind of look. I'm adding here some cerulean blue just to kind of echo the idea of a skyline in the background of these plants and landscape. Also, while the paper is still wet, I'm dropping in some more of this yellow paint and these yellow tones because I want to just make sure I get some of these light colors in the background before I add more layers. I love this technique, but just make sure that the paper you're using is thick enough to handle this kind of technique or washes by just experimenting and seeing how well it handles it. This paper I'm using is 300 GSM or 140 pounds, so it can handle these dreamy little translucent washes of watercolor super well. If you have never tried this technique before, I would highly recommend you giving this a go. I also like to blend colors in my lettering, and I'm going to be layering colors to do this. My first color will be cadmium red. What I do is add a pretty saturated version of this color to the very top 1/3 of the letters. And I chose cadmium red because of the word red in this title, Red Winged Trail, and also because I want to echo the color on the other page of red in the map. My next color I'm going for will be cadmium yellow, and what I'm going to be doing with that is just adding just a little bit of that color just in the middle of each of the letters as well. Again, I experiment a lot, so it doesn't mean that this is always going to work out super great, but I do think watercolor is a great medium to be able to experiment with. If you notice, I did leave some space at the bottom, and I'm going to be using that as a way to actually mix my paints. I'm using colors that I know will also work together too when I mix them. Taking a clean, damp brush, now what I'm going to do is just pull the color red down into that cadmium yellow and then pull it down into the blank space. How much you want to mix your colors together is entirely up to you, but I like to keep enough separation so you can see that it starts out as red, almost creating this ombre effect. This is just something that I learned how to do on my own. I just experimented and thought it would be fun to vary the color instead of mixing something and just putting it on flat. I love the idea of dimension and depth. The nice thing too with watercolor is if you don't like how something turns out, you can change it. And in this case, I decided that it was just too light on the bottom of the lettering for me, so I went in with some yellow ochre. I just felt like it made the lettering look a little bit more uniform and not so different in the saturation. You can always adjust your colors as well when everything is dry if you don't like how it turned out. Thanks so much for still being here, and please subscribe if you feel inspired or enjoying the video. And also like, comment, share the video. That helps me out so much, and I'd love to hear from you. Hit that hype button. That's a new thing that helps me get circulated on YouTube. And also follow me over at Instagram at my_nature diaries for more nature art. Last up is the lifting technique. Watercolor lends itself beautifully to lifting off the page, especially if you're trying to use it to create maybe some texture, or even if you're just wanting to remove some paint because maybe it was just a little too much. In this case, I'm just taking some of this paint that I applied. I'm using a damp, dry brush, wiping off on that paper towel, and just creating some spaces and some texture by lifting and removing some of the paint. Again, make sure you have a really good watercolor paper to use this technique. I also use this to help clean up any of those times, which are usually often, where I paint outside the lines, basically. I do try to clean this up as soon as possible because some of the paints are more staining than others, and if you don't want to have to try to figure that out, then just get right in there with a clean, damp brush and just pull that paint and wipe it off on a paper towel or cloth. Besides the fact that you can correct mistakes, you can also use the lifting technique to pull out paint from something that you're making to represent maybe strands of grass or flower stems, sticks. It could be all kinds of different things, or just to even create texture. If you ever feel stuck with a composition you're working on, then try the lifting technique and see if it works for you. To be honest, the best way to learn any kind of techniques are just to get in there and start playing around. You're looking at my finished journal, but I have all kinds of other practice journals where I work on these techniques, and I have developed things that I've enjoyed and I want to transfer into this finished journal. The goal of art isn't to always make our art look exactly like somebody else's or think that it's not good enough if it doesn't look like theirs, but really it's just to get started. How are we even going to know what we're capable of creating unless we start? And it's going to be ugly art at the beginning, but then I'm telling you, you're going to love it. As always, just remember, you are so amazing and creative, and I hope you start your journal today. And until next time, have a wonderful week. Bye.